name is Maria Garcia. I'm the author of the book We Made San Diego. This is my second book, and the purpose of this book was to tell about our history in San Diego, because there's so much history and we're not in the history books. You're lucky if you find a few pages on us. And in San Diego, we are the history of San Diego. So I felt it was very important that we share stories. Basically, they're oral history stories and a lot of pictures. I'm hoping that people will take time to read it and learn more about not only our culture, but about our history.
Jordan Jacobo is a native San Diegan, raised in San Isidro. His interest in the history of Latinos in San Diego seems to have grown a little with every day that passes. As a child, he was seen by his parents as a hyper kid. To keep him busy, his parents loaned him the family video camera. He was soon recruiting the neighborhood kids to act in the plays he was filming. Since his childhood, he has graduated to filming for KPBS, as well as for participating in the San Diego Film Week. Today, his wings have spread, and he directs, writes, and edits videos. In this process, he has explored not only San Diego, but Latinos in the community. As he learns about the Chicanos in San Diego, his questions go from humorously inquisitive to almost childlike curiosity. Let's learn what interests him. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Jordan Jacobo. Well, Jordan, I'd like to ask you questions, but feel free to ask me questions.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your experience in either as a Latino, a Mexican, or a Chicano.
Well, so I grew up in San Isidro, California, but it was an interesting experience for me because my parents have deep roots in the community, but my mother, she was born here in the United States, but her family is from Mexico, mostly Jalisco and Hidalgo. So I have a lot of roots in Mexico. On my father's side, though, he's from Texas. He was born in San Antonio, and his family goes back even before the Battle of the Alamo in San Antonio.
So do mine.
So while they're ethnically Mexican, I think they're more what used to be called Texican. I don't know if that term is still used, but they're very proud of it. But what's interesting to me is that it really is, even though we're ethnically similar, culturally it's very different. Texas is in the South. And, when I first went there, I thought to myself, well, I wonder if they'll have the same typical prejudices, not caring for, African Americans but the thing is, what I notice about my family, they're not racist towards black people, but in Texas, the Texan Mexicans were a little discriminatory when it came to other Mexicans from Mexico, which seemed bizarre to me because I just always figured that we were the same. It's not exactly the same culture, but ethnically we are. So there's always been that weird divide inside of me. And I've lived in Mexico. I lived in Pachuca Hidalgo for a couple months, and for me it was strange because when I went over there, they would call me El Gringo, but I was like, my Spanish wasn't perfect, but I spoke it. But here in the United States, I was always the Mexican guy, and so it was always a weird cross dual identity that it's for me growing up, it was hard to reconcile until I learned about Chicanos. And essentially that's how I identify. I identify as Mexican American and Chicano because that's where I fit into.
We have similar backgrounds. My father was born in a little town right outside of San Antonio, and his family are the original settlers of San Antonio. They came from the Canary Islands. My mother was born in Arizona. And so in that sense, I never had roots in Mexico, which is very strange because, a lot of people go back to Mexico. We went back to Arizona.
Pilgrimage up north to the motherland.
Yeah. And so it was different. I started identifying as a Chicana when I hit San Diego State, actually a little bit before I hit San Diego State, because the Chicano movement was in its heyday. And of course, the last thing I wanted to be was a Hispanic, because that was part of LJB and the Nixon. So I didn't identify with those two. So
yeah, it's so funny how that works because my mother went to San Diego State as well, but she never identified as Chicano, and that was just really never her thing. But on my father's side, we definitely identify as Chicano, and my aunt is one of the founding artists of Chicano Park. And so I'm glad that I had both influences, quite honestly, because it's given me very interesting perspectives. You know, I mean, it's the whole, like, you can't know one side unless you truly know the other side. And so I'm very grateful for that. But it's just, it's an interesting identity. And I think that there's so much history that goes into it. And, you know, in particular, you know, I found out about it because of the whole Chicano rights, because of the struggle for Chicano Park, which I understand you were in. You were there during the initial occupation.
Yeah.
Which fascinates me.
And you know, what I in my mind is watching the kids from Memorial and San Diego High come in a group to the park. There was, I don't know how many kids on each side. Some were little, you know, not little, but like 12 years old. And watching all these kids come in and believe it. And the señoras who endlessly cooked for the people that were there.
That's amazing.
It was just amazing.
Well, I kind of love, first off, God bless the señoras for providing food for them. But also, like, I know my grandma loved to cook for guests. So I wonder how much of a sacrifice it really was. They must have gotten excited, like, oh, there's people to cook for? What I see. But I respect that. And I understand that. I was reading a little bit about it, and I understand that first it was the students that set up in the park, but also it was, you know, it was whole families, and it was, I think, some of the clergy joined them, which I think that's what I read. But obviously you were there.
Yeah, we did it the right way. We went to their meetings. They agreed to give us a park, and look what's become.
And you're right, and you're right, because the broken promise made it personal.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost a personal insult. And what's incredible to me about the occupation of Chicano Park was that it essentially, it was such a weird coincidence. There was a student that went to City College.
Solis.
And he was playing hooky that day, and he saw the construction crew, and he said, hey, what are you guys building? They said, oh, we're building the parking area for the...
CHP.
Yeah. And so he said, what? And so he sounded the alarm at City College, and I love that just students came in droves. And it was such a sneaky thing for the city to have done that I think it was the right move for him to sound the alarm and get everybody there. I know that people were, city officials were upset that the space was being occupied, but what did they expect would happen? I mean, they went about it the wrong way, and people just reacted in the only way they really could. Because had they tried to pursue legal action, maybe they would have tied it up in the courts, maybe for years, or maybe nothing would have happened. They did it the right way. What I think is the most beautiful also is that I guess one of the people who occupied it, he was a brown beret, and did you see him? You were there. Did you see him commandeer one of the bulldozers to sort of level the ground?
I think you're talking about Jose, but I'm not sure.
I think so.
But I know that when they had the bulldozers were loaned from the Cacho family, okay, from Otay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they were loaned. But the city had some there. And I know that Laura Rodriguez chained herself to the bulldozer.
Wow.
I mean, these ladies, they weren't playing.
No.
They took it very seriously. I can still see, rest his soul, Jose Gomez with the axe. And you know, that land was hard. So it was, but to me it was amazing how just everybody came together. I think the older generation, Armando, across the street from the clinic, the store, and the owner of El Carrito, Al Johnson, and Laura, they had all been on that committee. And so to them, it was a real slap in the face.
Yeah, because they shined them on. It was a bold-faced lie by the city. I think they did the right thing. And the fact that people started just planting things there, that's incredible. Because it's not just saying, hey, look, we want you to give us this. No. If the city's not going to do it, then we're going to do it. And I just respect that so much, you know?
And, you know, 1970 was the height of the Chicano movement. 68 to 72 really is the way I see it. And those people just weren't going to stand for that.
Yeah.
That's what it was. They were not going to stand for it.
What I like, I've been reading a lot about the Chicano rights struggle, and what always seems to be so appropriate to me was this. It started as a student movement, which makes sense because the more I read about it, the more I found out that essentially they had no real representation in the schools. There were no bilingual teachers. They were punished and castigated for speaking Spanish, for daring to speak their own language, And the teachers didn't take them seriously because they go, well, just do mechanic shop, or, for the guys, the girls are probably going to get pregnant. So it really sprang out of a neglect. But what's interesting to me is that it's a neglect that was so endemic in the system. It's the product of colonization, because I know for Latin America, we had La Conquista, which was brutal because it was the forced subjugation. But to me, La Segunda Conquista was even more brutal because that's when they sent the priests in to essentially wipe out their culture and wipe out their belief systems and have them adopt essentially, this is what we believe. And in a way, that's even worse to me because it was a psychological type of thing. And they were essentially trying to set the boundaries. And it was something that has existed in the United States essentially from the beginning, ever since the founding fathers cast the British off, for representing them. The founding fathers cast off the yoke of the British overlords for taxing them without representation. But what do? The ancestors and essentially the heirs to that legacy start their westward expansion. And they do the same thing to the Native Americans and to the Mexicans who were here already. I have nothing but respect for a group of people who bands together to cast off the shackles of their oppressors. But when they turn around and then do it to other people, it's even worse because they've learned nothing and they know better.
I agree.
And essentially, when the students rose up, it was in rejection of that same philosophy that had been in place for hundreds of years.
And see, it was early morning, and Solis was on his way to City College. And he saw that, and he knocked on some doors, some of the community members' doors. Then he went to City. Interesting, I really found that memorial students came. Junior high school students will come out for a protest at the drop of a hat. But when you see them walking in mass like that, it was so different. It was amazing.
It must have been very, it's just incredible. It must have been amazing. I mean, what was it like to see so many different groups of people coming together? Because like you said, it's the middle schoolers, the señoras, the clergy. What was the feeling?
I think it was almost surprise because it was like, oh, there's this, look who's over here, that type of thing. And that's how I saw it. And I think there was a certain determination there too.
I love it.
Yeah.
What a great moment of unity, How did you hear about it?
I was working as an aide at Logan, and the principals asked me, well, what's going on at Chicano Park? I said, I don't know. And I didn't. But the minute I was off work, there I go to Chicano Park, which was right around noon. And then you knew what was going on. It had, when you're at a school, you don't see the news. You don't hear. And I wasn't aware, well, it wasn't a plan, so, it happened so spontaneously.
Wow.
But I went every day after work, I would go.
I love that.
Yeah.
And how many days did it last?
I think a week. Okay. I'm not sure. When they started negotiation, and there was a negotiation team, and Mayor Kern was having a royal fit. Okay. And then there was talk of, we'll go ahead and rent it or sub for $1 a year like they do and all this.
Oh yeah, like those leases.
Yeah.
It's, but I think these half measures are. What I wonder the most is this: how was there a sense that the city was finally relenting, or was there a sense that the city was just trying to shine you on and say, "Okay, we'll give you little things here and there"?
It was a sense, of course, we were young, so we thought, we won something, But there was also that sense of how long is it going to be? Yeah. Is this a park forever, or is it just while we maintain it?
That, and I understand that. I get that because I know that with the original, in LA, the high school walkouts, right. After a while, at first the police tried to, and they did arrest a lot of people. But then a lot of those charges were dropped. And then the school board eventually somewhat relented, and they reinstated one of those.
Sal Castro.
Right. And also they hired some bilingual teachers and sort of amended some of the curriculum. But about 3 months in, a lot of the organizers were arrested. And it was awful because they bided their time to sort of say, hey, look, they gave them a false sense of security, and then they moved in, which I think is awful. And I mean, eventually the charges were dropped against them because it was found that they were lawfully expressing their First Amendment rights. But I think that there's such a history of the people at the top sort of saying, okay, we'll give you what you want, and then working in other ways to sort of take that away. I know that happened in Texas. There was a political movement in the 60s called Los Cinco, and those gentlemen were taking some sort of political power, and they were voted in, but the people at the top found little ways to take that power away. They would trump up charges, or they would say, well, you're not exactly a citizen, this and that, technicalities and stuff. And out of that, the man who organized Los Cinco sort of took those lessons, and he turned around and he further developed another political movement called La Raza Unida. And there was more power in that, and like anything, you continue to grow from your mistakes. But I'd like to say, and I'd be curious if you agree with this. Would you say that there's progress being made on that front?
Some. It depends. I always feel like they opened the door just so far, and then they close it. Now, are you aware that there was walkouts here in San Diego?
During the initial Chicano?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know anything.
Lincoln and San Diego High.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Lincoln and San Diego High had walkouts, and Norma Cáceres was a student at Lincoln, and the blacks are the first ones that went out at Lincoln for the very same thing, Black studies, all of this.
Of course.
And then she, because she was bilingual, was able to unite the Black community and the Latino community over the concerns they had.
That's great.
Yeah, at San Diego High, I know that Linda Buffington, and I don't remember her maiden name, led some of the students' walkouts. So there was walkouts here. They didn't last half as long as they did in LA, but there was walkouts.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because it all comes down to making your voice heard, which I think is necessary. And of course, administrators don't like it, but that kind of means you're doing it right, because you're getting their attention. It's
to me, it was very interesting when I did the book, and I interviewed about 187 and 227, the laws that they did pass. The students were shocked to find Latino administrators not going along with it. Now, I'll never know, since I didn't talk to them, if they didn't go along with it because of their job, if they didn't go along with it because they really believed that it was wrong to have protests. But there was others who said, you guys do it, don't tell me about it, and I'll not know a thing when it happens.
It's probably the way to be.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, but I am glad to see that, changes did get made, because, my mother she was a teacher for over 40 years, and she was a bilingual teacher. And so in many ways, she's essentially the beneficiary of that change, And I think it's great, because I've worked in schools before, mostly in San Isidro. I worked in an after-school program, and a lot of our students were they didn't speak any English, which I get. It's an immigrant community, because it's a nation of immigrants. It's been from the start. So anybody that doesn't like it, I think, is missing the point.
And people talk about, well, why don't those Mexicans let go of their language? They don't realize that that's the biggest part of our culture. It's like, to me, it's like asking a black person, well, turn white before you can do this, And also the other part is, it's the mother tongue. It's the tie to the family. It's very sad when a grandmother and a grandchild cannot communicate. You lose so much of the culture. You lose so much. But people don't see it as it's a way to learn. You only have to learn to read in one language, so then you understand the concept of reading.
Yeah.
So you can do it in French, Chinese, whatever. But people don't understand that. They think, oh, they're holding on to that Spanish.
Yeah, I agree with you. I when I was very little, I was an only child for many years. Before my brother came along when I was 6 or 7. But in the beginning, my mother was a full-time educator. My father was setting up a business. So during the day, I would spend it with my grandparents, and that was the first language I learned was Spanish, and I learned their Spanish, and I'm very grateful for that. Now, eventually, TV came in, and I learned a lot of English through the TV, but Spanish was my first language, and English is preferred only because that's the language in which I was educated. But I love Spanish, and I try very hard to keep up with it. I still speak Spanish to my parents, and I think it's a beautiful language. I'm scared that it'll lessen in time, and that I'll I don't know. I want to keep up with it.
And I certainly understand why parents didn't teach their children Spanish. They were punished for it. I know a lady who was put in a trash can to stand at a Catholic school because she was speaking Spanish on the playground. I know other kids that were spanked. Jeez. Sometimes they were hit on the hand or whatever. And so they didn't want their children to face that, to have to go through the same thing. But they paid a price. I think you always pay a price, especially when it's grandparents. Yeah. And the different generations and the different experiences. I know my dad never talked about the discrimination in Texas. And I don't know if it was because it was so awful. And in the 60s, there were still signs that said, no Mexicans, no blacks, and no dogs allowed. Jeez. I mean, this is the 60s. Everybody said, oh, that was a long time ago. That's not that long ago.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible to me because, I find it to be very similar with African Americans. People go, what are you worried about slavery? It's 200 years ago. Well, it wasn't. But also, if you see African Americans, with some gray hair, they may not look that old, but they most likely were alive during a time when they didn't have equal rights. So it really is relatively recent, and I think that the most important thing is there's that old cliche, if you don't study your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And yes, it's a cliche, but for a reason, because it's true. And
very true.
I think even today we're at risk of losing ground on some of the gains. I think that in terms of civil rights, not just for Latinos, but for all groups in the United States.
I have a very good friend who was raised in the South, African American, and she remembers watching a boy being dragged behind the car because he looked at a white girl in shorts.
Oh my God.
And I think this happened a lot. And I also think that's one of the things that made a lot of Latinos decide that they were going to integrate and marry a white lady, was because that was the ultimate, you have an ultimate goal, or I don't know what you would call it. And I think it's good for people to intermarry. I have no problems with that. But it's the reasons. Why are you really going to blend these two cultures? And you have to have a spouse who's willing to give and take when it comes to that.
I agree with you. Are you marrying just because it's a status symbol, or are you doing it for love? Yeah. It's interesting for me to note that when I went to Mexico, I was very surprised. When I lived in Mexico, it was the early 90s, and I was surprised that I wasn't aware of the class system until I got out there. But it really is, it's such a weird holdover. But even today, I will say that I think things are improving in Mexico. But then it was, the darker your skin, the less opportunities you had, and it was so bizarre to me, even in my own family. My family's interesting. My parents, there was no machismo in my family. My mother worked full time. My father was starting a business. So he would often cook, and he would often pick us up. And he often deferred to my mother, which I always respected, because it was a real partnership. And in that respect, I've always respected my parents for that. But there was also that holdover of classism. Within my family, there's 4 of us. I'm the darkest, and my brother was the lightest. He's a güerito. He has blue eyes, he had blonde hair. And I remember people saying, "Oh, you're so lucky," about him. And I was like, "Geez." And there was always that sense that he was the one that they paraded around with pride. Now, it might have just been because I was a pain in the ass and he was not. And hindsight will reveal that in time, I suppose. But it is such a strange thing to see people still look down upon for their skin color or for their class. But something gave me hope recently. I was in Tijuana 2-3 months ago. I was talking to a cab driver, and I was talking to him about a lot of the Haitians that had come to as immigrants to Tijuana. And I said, "How are they treated in Tijuana?" And he said, "We love them. We love them. They're respectful. They work hard. They're kind people." And by and large, I think the people of Tijuana have really embraced them, which is incredible because I think 10 years before.
Oh, that wouldn't have been,
Yeah. So I want to say that certain aspects of our society are improving, but others, unfortunately, I feel are not.
I won't feel San Diego has reached it till I see a mayor that's Latino, a governor that's Latino, and I may not make it quite that far, in my life, but I would love to see it. If you think about it, I believe the year was 1972 when Pete Chacon was elected as the first representative from San Diego. Now, I mean, all these years and no Latinos.
Yeah, that's incredible that it took that long.
And then Pete was a vice principal at Sherman.
Oh.
Okay, and he worked very hard, and it was a really grassroots campaign. He didn't have a lot of money. I think a lot of people didn't think that he would make it. And the night he made it, the pride in the community. I remember it was at the old Cortez Hotel, and in the elevator was activists and just regular folk, and everybody just celebrating. We have a Latino as a representative.
How great is that? Yeah. And in the end, isn't that what it comes down to? I mean, America was built on fair representation. That's why they cast off the yoke of the British. So for the groups within here to not be represented seems criminal to me. And it seems very anti everything that the founding fathers ostensibly claimed that the United States should stand for.
And I'm not so sure they really believed it.
I don't think so either, quite honestly.
I think it was a convenient way to get yourself in power.
Yeah.
And take, to look at somebody else and say, because there's that, somebody has to be on the bottom and somebody has to be on the top. And so it worked out that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm really pleased. I mean, I never thought we'd see a Latina on the Board of Supervisors. Mayors that were Latina, Mary Salas in Chula Vista. There was, and that race hasn't been determined. Oh my God, in Oceanside, Esther Sanchez.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they're still counting votes.
Jeez.
I know. Yesterday I heard they said a slight lead. I don't know if a slight lead means 10 or 100. So.
I hope it's significant enough to
keep her there. She's mayor there, and she's done some good things. I also think that people try to put us into a little. They live in, if they're Mexicanos, they must live in Barrio Logan or south, south all the way to the border. And they don't realize we're everywhere.
Yeah.
And
your book covers a lot of that because the story about those restaurateurs in Solana Beach fascinated me. I had no idea that it had such, Latino roots. And I love that kind of stuff.
And I follow that community, probably for the same reason. I was so shocked at how deep the Latino roots were there. But of course, it's facing gentrification now. Now, another subject I think we should discuss is Latino art. Because people have a tendency, art is art. Mm-hmm. And our art is different. The murals, Guillermo Aranda went to Mexico City to study, went to Mexico to study the murals. Wow. Because we weren't into really doing murals.
And there's such a rich tradition throughout
Mexico.
But in particular in Mexico City, there's so many beautiful murals. And what I love about it is they're open for public viewing. I mean, they get that it's for the public. And I feel that same spirit was brought to Chicano Park. I love what's been done there. And one of the most interesting things about it is that, they say, well, you should know about your history, but it's so in your face there, as it should be. Those murals tell the story of the Chicano struggle and the struggle of the Mexican American and the Latino in the United States in general and in San Diego in particular. And I think that's so incredible because, you could read about it, but that's not for everybody. But these murals, there's no denying them,
I had a cousin visit last year from Texas, and I took that out. Whoever comes to visit, that's one of the first places I take him is to the park. And she said, it's really overwhelming. People have described it, but till you're standing under those pillars, looking at the art yourself, you don't understand what it means.
I agree.
I
had this summer I had two friends come to town they live in a rural town in Pennsylvania. But they specifically asked me if I could take them to Chicano Park. And they were fascinated by it. But one of them was a little nervous. She said, well, we're white. Are we okay? I go, let me tell you something. Chicano Park was set up for people, for everyone, people like me so that I can learn about the Chicano, my own history. But also people like you so that you could learn about the Chicano history. Everyone's welcome here. And it really is, that's who it's for. And they were fascinated by it, and like you said, it's impossible to not feel some sort of awe, on just the scale of everything, and also how it's told. I think it's incredible, and I think that it's very representative of the arts, Chicano arts here in San Diego, because obviously there's a lot of Chicano theater. I know, there's the pastorela. Many pastorelas that go on all over town, which I love, and there's a lot of Chicano artists that I think are really making a difference in town. Not just Bill Virches, who really is the top, but you have artists like Dave Rivas, who's moving into theater and performing arts, or just incredible things that are happening in theater, which really theater was one of the cornerstones of the Chicano rights movement.
Yes.
Teatro Campesino, started by
Luis Valdez.
Right. That was one of the ways in which they got their message out, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. The first time I saw it performed was at San Diego State.
Oh,
and it was about the Great Boycott.
Okay,
and that was maybe 69, maybe 70.
Wow, and it was a Luis Valdez piece?
Yeah.
That must have been incredible.
I have seen several of his plays, and I've met him recently. I met him way back when, but I'm sure he doesn't remember, and I barely remember where I was. But it's so fascinating that there's so much talent.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Poetry.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Artists, the original artists, from the park. There's some, they're all still around, but there's a whole new group coming in too. And that's interesting.
And what I love about, what I find, so my aunt was one of the founding artists, Don Ancin Guerra Renick, and she recently came back to restore one of her murals. But what I like was, I would pop in from time to time, and of course Victor Ochoa was there restoring one of his murals, but they would often work with the new artists coming in, and I really like that the founding generation of artists is essentially teaching and passing the baton to this new generation of artists, which I think is great, because if you're going to come in and sort of, if you're going to be the heirs to that tradition, then you need to learn from the people who started it,
I do have one concern, the Mecha mural.
Okay.
There was a Latina who was president of Mecha, and she's not on the mural. And I think in those days, we found a lot of the women doing the work and the guys parándose el cuello, that they had done it,
So, have you seen a lot of that? I mean, especially in those days, was there a lot of...
Definitely.
Jeez. It's just incredible to me that... See, that's what I don't understand. So there's a group that's fighting for ostensibly equal rights, right? We're one group of people who want to be equal to this group of people. But then within that movement to sort of make the women lesser, I mean, isn't that essentially doing to them within your group what the group you're fighting is doing to you?
It's gotten much, much better. But in the early days, it wasn't that easy.
Wow. It really surprises me. Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't, but it's still horrible to hear. But I'm glad that it's getting better, you know?
You know, there was an occupation of a church camp, Camp Oliver, which is like by Alpine, Descanso. Okay, out that area. And there was a conference held there the day before Thanksgiving. And instead of leaving, they stayed because the Catholic Church has been one of the biggest oppressors of the Latino community. I mean, I'm a Catholic and all of that, but they're often, you know, you should do this, you should do that. You know, it's not ladylike to do that. And so it became an issue. And the one thing that certainly came out of, and Vince de Baca was the leader in that thing, but there was protests at the bishop's house here in Mission Valley, Third Tri, Mission Hills. Okay, and we were picketing. And one night we even picketed the wrong house because two huge mansions, and okay, next to each other, and so. But what came out of there was the Padre Hidalgo Senior Center that gave services. You know.
Oh.
And can you imagine the first time Father Brown blessed the lowriders?
That must have been amazing.
It was wonderful, but there were those people. Oh my God, we're all going to hell because they're blessing those lowriders. You know, it was always this and that.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I mean, obviously I have my own thoughts about that because I was raised Catholic. And I am by no means an atheist, and I am by no means anti-Catholic Church. But I do recognize that they've had a big hand in
oppression.
In oppression, big time. You know, when the conquistadors came, the priests from the Catholic Church came right behind them. Hence the Segunda Conquista. You know, and so I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think it's a very fine line. You and I were talking earlier about how you sometimes pray to St. Jude, and so does my mother.
I have him on speed dial.
I love it. And I certainly believe in that myself. But people have pointed out, they go, well, but that's Santeria. Mm-hmm. Maybe. But the fact of the matter is that, like everything in our culture, it's a mix of our beliefs and other beliefs. You know, Catholicism didn't really start with the whole praying to saints. But here in the Americas, it's a holdover of Native American polytheism, and I think it meshed fairly decently with Catholicism, and it's our belief system. You know, it's like everything; it's a new thing. Chicanos are I would say from a historical standpoint a relatively new thing, and as is the way that we worship and our belief systems. You know,
and see, I feel people should go to the church where they found the most comfort. And if they don't have a church and they don't want to go, that's fine with me too. But I think we need to be more accepting.
I agree with you. Yeah. I definitely agree with you.
By the way, there was a group of women, the Comisión Femenil, and Gracia de Pic was very active in that, and so was Lilia Lopez. And they got called to go to Copenhagen to a conference and talk about. And they went, and it was so funny because Lydia's husband said to her, well, you're not going. There's no way you're going to go. She said, fine. Handed him the phone. Said, you call the president and tell him I can't go. So that was the end of that. That was the end of that conference.
That's great. But they went to Copenhagen as part of what conference was it? And what were they?
National Women's Rights something. I'd have to look it up to give you the correct name.
But I love that they went. But how funny is it? I mean, imagine being invited to speak at a National Women's Conference and not being able to go because your husband demands it. So good for her for, standing up to him.
She was always a fighter.
I love
it. Yeah.
I love it. And I think the overall message is this. We continue to fight for, to have our voice heard. Mm-hmm. I think that's what the whole Chicano movement was about. I think that's what the struggle for Chicano Park was about. And I think that we continue that legacy and that tradition in our art here in San Diego, And for my part, I try to do that as well. In general, I'm an artist, but in particular, I'm a filmmaker. And I'm trying to tell stories that not only represent our culture, but really get our message across, you know. And so if and when I ever have an opportunity to do that, I do, because it's very important to me. And I think, honestly, as an artist with Chicano roots, it's my responsibility to do it.
I agree. Well, we've had a very interesting conversation. We've barely touched the surface.
That's true.
And the fight doesn't end.
Agreed.
It continues. We have many, many more fights to take on.
Yeah, but I'm here for it. And I just want to say that I appreciate your generation doing the things that you did, you know, because I think that it makes it a little easier for each subsequent generation. And I do want you to know that I appreciate that struggle, you know, and I hope to continue it on my part, doing whatever I can on my end. So thank you.
I'll pass that word to all of my generation that worked so hard. It's not me, it's everybody.
Well, I have nothing but respect for their struggle and their sacrifice.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to tune in to the We Made San Diego audio video podcast. Please subscribe. Visit our website, wemadesandiego.com, to learn more. My name is Maria E. Garcia. Adios.
Did you know